And every big seller that I've talked to over the last, year or two, they all have told me pretty much the same thing, that they're hearing all these complaints, but for them, it's gotten easier in a lot of ways.
What's up, Amazon sellers, and welcome back to the Clear the Shelf podcast with myself and my sarcastic co-host, Chris Rasick. This week, we've got Jimmy Smith on the show. Jimmy's done over 10 million in online sales. He's run a software business in the Amazon space. He runs the Legends community where he's trained thousands of Amazon sellers. And he just hosted a closed door event with 75 or so sellers. I got to be one of the ones in the room that surfaced some patterns that I think will be interesting to chat about. Jimmy's perspective is a little bit different than a lot of the guests that we have on this show because he sits at the intersection of selling and software developing and coaching. He's on the selling side. He's built tools for sellers, and he works with sellers at every level from brand new all the way to seven figures. And that vantage point kind of gives him a read on the market that a lot of people don't necessarily get. He's also been vocal about a take that we think you need to hear. Like 2026 might actually be the best time in a decade for the Amazon seller. Not necessarily because it's easier, but because competition is thinning while the opportunity is also growing. And that sounds a little counterintuitive, especially if you spend any time on social media. So we're going to dig into that a bit. We're also going to get into the margin stacking system that he taught at his event, what he sees with AI and real Amazon businesses, and then, of course, why he shut down his software business. Jimmy, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you to both of you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. And, just want to say, I've always appreciated the content you both have been putting out. This podcast is one of the few that I recommend to people. And so it's always great it's just an honor, honestly, to be able to be on here with you guys.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Before we dive in, guys, you guys know the drill. Like, we spend minutes preparing for each one of these episodes. So if you get some value from this podcast, do us a solid, pound that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment, let us know what you think. The best way for us to grow this show is by getting you to interact and letting us know this is the kind of content you want to see. If you guys keep your end of the bargain, we'll keep ours, and we'll keep showing up, trying to bring you some education mixed in with a little entertainment. All right, let's dive in. Let's set the table a little bit. Jimmy, let's start with like the quick version for anyone who doesn't know you. You've been in the Amazon space for years. You've sold a ton on Amazon. You've run a software company. You run a community and a coaching program. And before all of that, we were kindred spirits in the insurance game. So walk us through what got you from slinging insurance to slinging adult diapers on Amazon.
Yeah. So this was back in 2015. It's whenever I started selling on Amazon. I'm on my 11th year, which is crazy to me at this point. It's almost a third of my life. So kind of interesting to think of it in that way. But yeah, so I was selling insurance. It was something that I did right out of college, as a lot of people do if you've got any kind of sales or desire to do sales. And honestly, I just kind of hated it. I hated having a boss. I hated having to go into an office and do cold calls and all of these other things where I just had people always looking over my shoulder. But additionally, it wasn't just about the job. It was mainly about missing out on opportunities with my family and, not being able to do the things that I wanted to do when I wanted to do them. And so back in 2015, I looked at two different opportunities. One was switching to real estate investing and wholesaling and flipping, or doing Amazon. And from the risk standpoint and just the ease of getting into it, Amazon seemed like the best opportunity. And so I jumped into Amazon from there and slowly grew it over the next couple of years. I quit my job in 2018 and was able to scale the business to over seven figures in 2019. And yeah, it's been, the rest is history from there. I think I started the first course that I did in 2019, 2020, same with Replen dashboard. And so it's just been constantly reiterating, through the years. Amazon changes things all the time, but the freedom and the ability to do what I want, when I want, to go on vacations when I want to start work when I want to, or stop when I want to. That's why I continue to do it, honestly, and why I love running businesses. And I think, entrepreneurship is safer than having a full-time job anyway. And so from my perspective, it's just, it's something that I couldn't not do anymore, is having a business, and especially selling on Amazon for the ease of just working from home and being able to do the things I want to.
I was reminded of a quote just recently. It was, I would rather have 1,000 bosses than one boss. And, that's kind of what we get in entrepreneurship. Every single customer is our boss, but I'd much rather have to answer to 1,000 customers than just one boss who can just let you go at any time. What kind of insurance were you selling?
So I sold commercial insurance. So I started out doing just property and casualty insurance with businesses. And I also was able at the time to do health insurance before it switched to the Affordable Care Act. And then after that, I moved to just doing property and casualty insurance for businesses that were doing over $10 million a year in revenue. And so it was a good income. I did well at it, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Long sales cycle on that kind of commercial insurance. I remember a few of those. All right. So you said there was a point where you realized the networking skills that you learned or built while you were selling insurance translated to building an Amazon business. We talk about this kind of stuff a ton, but I feel like it's either not heard or it is people don't want to do this. Can you kind of expand on how important it is?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So from the standpoint of networking, the skills that I learned, I honestly wasn't the best networker in insurance, but it was something that I had to do. You go to those networking events and stuff because you're just trying to connect with other business owners, and the business owners can sniff you out a little bit that you're selling them insurance. And so, that you have to kind of build that rapport with them and hope that it works out. And for me, that's a difficult thing to do on an insurance side. I'm very much more of an introverted person. And even though I, do stuff publicly online, it's because I'm introverted, right? I can do this by myself in the background. However, the importance of networking is probably the most important thing to succeeding in just about any business, even an online one. You can run your business by yourself, but eventually you're going to run into issues and you're going to need somebody else's help to kind of guide you along the way, or to even just bounce ideas off of, even if it's just one other person. And I've utilized a lot of the networking things that I've done in, creating relationships with retail store managers, in growing the networking that I have for other sellers online. And for a lot of people, they can start doing that through, X.com, right? You can go to X and start building those relationships. It could be being in a free community or a paid community. It could be just even trying to step out of your comfort zone, once a month and have a coffee with somebody that you met at an event. Those types of things, if you can build up those relationships, they can be very helpful. Now, I will say that people need to audit their relationships because it's very easy in the space, especially now, to get very negative and to have that kind of continually repeating loop and cycle. And so if you're trying to create a better life for yourself, audit that space a lot more and make sure that you're speaking with people that are at least positive about different ways of making things work. But networking has always been the way that I've grown and the way that my businesses have grown. If I look at all of my businesses, none of them would have happened without somebody else also being there with me or another connection that I made. And that goes all the way back to even internships I did in college. And so it's just, to me, it's one of the things a new seller or an experienced seller should focus on, is just growing their relationships through time.
Yeah, I recently read a concept called the invisible staircase. And it's basically where no matter how hard you look, you're not going to see the next step until your foot starts moving. And that's basically, I attribute a lot of that success to the network, something we talk about a lot. So preaching to the choir there.
Yeah.
Hey, so sorry if this is a sore subject. I hope it's not. I hope you're okay talking about it, but we teased the software angle and we mentioned Replen dashboard. You recently shut that down after, I believe, 6 years. And that's no small decision. So I was wondering if you could tell us what happened. And then on top of that, what did that teach you about platform risk? Because that's a term that kind of hovers over the space every once in a while.
Yeah, so there are a lot of lessons that I learned from running Replen dashboard. First, it started out of a need. So it was the first inventory management and lead tracking tool for resellers, specifically arbitrage sellers. And it started just because it was a spreadsheet that I had and we needed to move it into a software so other people could use it. And it was a great business for 6 years. It was a lot of fun. But honestly, it just took up a lot of my time. And there are so many other tools that have been coming out recently that I started to believe were better than Replen Dashboard. And I didn't have the time, the bandwidth to really dive into it and make Replen Dashboard what it needed to be to properly compete in the marketplace. And so, that was why we decided to shut it down, partially also because of Amazon's changes in their API fees. We could have made a lot of enhancements and improvements to the way we were collecting and storing data, but that would have just been so much time involved. And for me, it was an opportunity cost standpoint. I can see that if I spent more time on my Amazon business, or spent more time in the community, or spent more time on really just about anything else at that point, it would have been a better use of my time from a financial standpoint. And also just taking a look at the ease of creating software now, it is so much easier to do so. When we started it, we needed a full developer, right, to go through and write all the code themselves. And creating software is so much easier. So the game has changed at this point, where I didn't feel like we could actually continue to keep up and compete in the marketplace. And I think for me, that's a lesson that I've learned, is just, sometimes it makes sense to take a look at the other opportunities you have and say, you know what, I need to cut this one loose to better serve these other things that would be better. And I'm able to now talk about other software programs that I felt were better in the marketplace anyway, things that are auto updating supplier costs for you, and things that are able to build in AI into some of the replenishment systems. That to me has been a huge game changer that we just didn't have the bandwidth or the resources to really dive into. Now, one of the lessons that I learned in running Replen Dashboard, I was honestly pretty quiet about it for 6 years. It was just something that I'd talk about every once in a while on YouTube, or maybe I'd send an email out about it, but I never really focused on it as a full-time business. And that was a mistake of mine. I think had I for 6 years really, did a lot of effort in marketing it, I think it would have done even better. And so, we had over 1,000 or 1,500 people that went through it through the years. And I think had I done a better job at showing people how to use it, talking about it more, it would have been one of the premier softwares in the space, just because it was basically first to market. But, that's a mistake that I made. And I've learned, marketing is a constant thing. And if you want to succeed in any business, you need to basically never shut up about talking about your tool or your business, because that's how people gain awareness. And that was a mistake that I made. But ultimately, it just came down to the decision of opportunity costs and what would be a better use of my time.
Yeah, there's a reason that companies spend millions and millions on Super Bowl ads. Everyone knows Doritos exist, but it's a matter of just kind of branding that name into people, the consumer's mind. So Jimmy, 6 years ago, did you have a software background or interest in it, or was it simply need for your own business coupled with that entrepreneur that you had?
Yeah, so I never had a software background. And so that was a part of it, for me, is I had to find other people that could develop this. 6 years ago, it came out of the course that I did, the first course, the iteration that I went through, the replenishables course, and people just needed a way to replenish their items. And so I had a spreadsheet, and instead of trying to show people, hey, here's all the reports you download, and if Amazon changes a report, then here's how you fix that issue in the spreadsheet, it was just a need. And we wanted to serve that need. Now, I met another seller at the time, and this is the kind of the power of networking. And that seller, Carl Jacoby, I'm not sure if you've had him on the channel or not, but he, him and I built a great relationship, and he had his own spreadsheet as well. And so we decided to combine forces and get developers through Upwork at the time. And one of the biggest issues that we had is those developers did all right in building the foundation, but it was basically duct taped together early on. It was kind of a glorified spreadsheet. And so finding other people or another developer that could actually make it what it was for the last few years was a hard road and lots of money down the drain, unfortunately. But the only reason Replen Dashboard lasted as long as it did is because of another networking introduction that I had that introduced me to somebody else that has built software for e-commerce sellers. And he was able to fix it, and it was running great for those last few years. But yeah, I have no software background, but now that person is a business partner with me in a lot of different ventures. And so it's been fun to get to work with him. And it would never have happened if I hadn't been at a conference, met another seller who also knew this person. And so, yeah, I didn't have any software background, but it was just a need that we wanted to fill for everybody else that that needed it.
Great. And then you mentioned the changes that Amazon's made as far as API access, and I want to see if you can expand on it. You've said that this is going to cause a lot of Amazon seller tools to either raise prices dramatically or possibly shut down completely. What, from a seller perspective, what should they be doing now to kind of fortify their software stack?
Great question. So, it's interesting. My API, I guess, statement that a lot of software tools are going to have to increase prices, that may actually be incorrect. So I talked with like Dylan Carter from Aura, and, he said that they've made a lot of adjustments in how they collect data. And so, I may be incorrect on some of the software price increases, although we have seen some of that across the board on different tools already. But the way that Amazon is now charging is based on get calls, which means that you're going out and you're getting information from Amazon. And just one ASIN isn't one get call. You may have multiple calls for one particular ASIN. And so in terms of Replen dashboard, we have millions of ASINs that we were doing multiple get calls per hour. And so those were a lot of calls. It would have been a minimum of $120,000 of expenses extra per year for us on Replen dashboard, 10 grand a month. And so we could have done a lot of work to reduce that. Now, the issue is whenever you reduce it, you may actually be getting stale data. And so that's some of the things we may see in software, but there may also be other people like Aura and other software tools that have better ways of collecting data that Amazon would prefer. Amazon's just using it to kind of clean up how the data is getting collected and what information they give out to people. And so from that standpoint, because of the extra expenses for, I would say, unsophisticated software builders, that's going to cause them to have to either raise prices or increase their expenses to reduce how much that they're pulling back from Amazon. So that's kind of where my thought process was coming from. But I may be wrong on some of it. We may not see the software price increases for a while. I just kind of feel like at some point we're going to see more of that. Now, in terms of, I can't remember the other full question here, but kind of what should sellers be doing to fortify their software stack? Was that correct? Yeah. So on that standpoint, I think that it just comes down to utilizing tools that you believe in and trying to be within one ecosystem that you like to use. So there are a lot of tools right now that are multiple, or that have multiple use cases to them. And before, you could have 5 or 6 different software programs that you were working with. I think that the consolidation of software is only going to get bigger over the next few years. And you're going to see sellers that are able to switch to one program from one company that's able to do 90% of the things that you need. And then maybe you have another software or two that you also have for specific use cases. But that's kind of how I think people should do it. Instead of having 5 to 10 different software tools, try to find ones that are able to do as much as possible, as good as they can make it, because then you can save some money on that end. And then, API from that standpoint, you're not getting 15-20% price increases from 6 or 7 different tools. You're getting maybe a 15% price increase from one tool and then maybe another one. So that's kind of how I view it, is if you can find an ecosystem to live in, that's kind of what I would recommend for sellers.
Excuse me. I think I've heard you made a pretty strong case that like 2026 is actually a really good time to be an Amazon seller. And I think that we're on the same page with you. Matter of fact, there was a Marketplace Pulse report that showed there's a record low new seller registrations, but there's also a growing number of $1 million sellers. We also know that Amazon's third-party gross merchandise volume is climbing. Can we talk about that a little bit? Like, why is this a good thing for sellers in 2026?
Well, I think that it's actually a good thing for sellers that are serious about the business model. So, what we've been seeing over the last few years, and Amazon's always been this way, right? They'll gate something or they'll surprise you with something. But lately, it's been so much harder for new sellers to really get a grip on things, especially new sellers that are just testing it out. And it's always kind of good to test new things out. I think that's an important thing to do. But whenever you go into any business model, especially Amazon, if you're testing it out, is you testing it for a year, then great. I think you'll succeed. But if you're saying, hey, I want to see how fast I can flip some money and make some money on this, I think that it's going to be a harder road because of the mindset behind it. But for experienced sellers that have built systems that are able to, utilize their current existing connections and continue to grow, this is the best time, as it has been for a long time, this is the best time to be able to double down on that, because we have a lot less new sellers. If you're ungated in certain brands and categories, you have a little bit more of protection on your business than you used to, because you used to have to compete with every new seller in certain things. And if you're an experienced seller that got ungated and hard to get ungated in brands or categories, then you've got a little bit more protection than you used to. Amazon has come out with a lot of different resources for account health and just trying to help. Now, it may be a little bit, it may not be the best help, but they're at least trying. And so I think as an experienced seller, you have a lot more runway than you used to with Amazon. Unless you make a big mistake, Amazon will just cut off an experienced seller if they, sold a counterfeit product. But if you are doing things the right way, you should be fairly confident that you can continue to grow, that you can continue to invest some resources into the business model, because it's gotten a little bit easier. And every big seller that I've talked to over the last, year or two, they all have told me pretty much the same thing, that they're hearing all these complaints, but for them, it's gotten easier in a lot of ways. Now, there are always going to be wrenches Amazon throws our way, whether it's how they, do their reimbursements, and they're doing it on manufacturing costs versus our, other costs that we've had, or the full price. But, that's stuff that big sellers can deal with, and they can build systems around. Ultimately, for a new seller, it's a hard thing to deal with all of the stuff Amazon throws your way, the gating issues and whatnot, unless you are serious about saying, hey, this is where I want to kind of, be able to grow my business over the next year or 2 years. If you can do that, you'll be fine. But it's no longer I'm going to test this out for 2 months and see if I can make a bunch of money really quick. And if I can, then I'll be good. It's a much more difficult road, in my opinion. Now, and I would still recommend new sellers get into it. It's a longer road to seeing the success probably that you're hoping for than what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Right before we came on, a friend of the show, Zach Altman, posted a post on Twitter and said that he's 12 for 12 with ungating, which, and I understand that it is a more difficult time to get ungated, but when you take it really serious, it's definitely not impossible. And he laid out exactly like what he's doing. I'm curious about this. You said a lot of people start this and they're like, well, how fast can I make money? Why is that so prevalent in this space? And I want to frame this as, if someone were to go and start a restaurant, like, I don't know anybody who starts a restaurant thinking, oh man, if I don't make $1 million flipping these burgers in the next 6 months, I'm out of here. And I think the same goes for, just about everything. Even a lawn mowing business, doing power washing, whatever it is, nobody goes into it with, I'm giving this 3 to 6 months, and if I'm not a millionaire, I'm out. Why is that so prevalent in our space?
Oh, honestly, I'm going to blame us a little bit, right? So our space of being online, and maybe it's not us specifically, but the people that are out typically selling courses, a lot of times will do so from the standpoint of, hey, I made $10,000 in 30 days doing this, or here's the exact product that I went and bought from Marshall's, and now I'm going to make all this money. But they don't talk about the actual real issues. And I know you do on this channel. I know that I do on my YouTube channel. But ultimately, a lot of times people get into the space because they think that it's fast, it's quick flips, and it's easy, not knowing that there's a lot of logistics that go into actually making this a success. And so that's a good thing for experienced sellers, because if you've gone through the process and you understand how to do shipments and how to handle the back end issues from Amazon, you're going to be good if you've gone through that first roadmap. But for people that are just like, they need an extra $500 a month, this is something that they're trying because somebody told them it's a quick and easy road. Now, we have people all the time that go from 0 to 10K in just a few months, but we know that 10K, there's a lot of costs of goods sold that go into it. There's more inventory you have to purchase. This is a business. It's not necessarily a side hustle anymore like it used to be. Now, you can still have a side hustle on eBay. You still have a side hustle for Facebook Marketplace because the cash flow cycles are so much faster. But Amazon has slowed down the cash flow cycles. They take out a lot of fees. They change how they've done the reimbursements. And so this is a great business for business owners, but very difficult. If you're like, I need an extra $500 each month, so I'm going to sell on Amazon. That's a tough road. If you have $100 to start with, you can do it, but it's going to be tough. You'd be much better off finding free stuff on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist and flipping it right locally. So I think that's why we're in this industry of, we see so many people on social media that talk about the big numbers that they've done and how fast that they've done it. But a lot of times they don't talk about the difficult side of it all. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, is the difficult side. But the other problem, if you're talking about how easy it is, to do Amazon and you're showing all these numbers, you're probably getting more followers, you're getting more subscribers, you're in a continual feedback loop of this is the stuff people want to see. And so I'm going to keep talking about this and not really go through all of the negatives and the realism that actually comes into it. But yeah, I agree. From the restaurant standpoint, you're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get started. Whereas with Amazon, you can still start with $1,000, $5,000 and, over the next year, make more money than you ever would have trying to start a restaurant. So it's still an excellent opportunity. It's just, I blame the industry of influencers a little bit for why people kind of have that expectation. And I don't know if you do or not, but that's kind of where I view it.
I can confirm that leading with hard work and that this is a business, not a get rich quick scheme, does not sell more courses. So
right. Yeah. And I know I'm one of the problems too. I mean, I don't recommend people buy the book anymore, but I wrote a book in 2022. It's called Side Hustle to Full-Time Income. And it was about starting an Amazon business and growing it into a full-time income using systems and things. I think some of the principles are still real, but I would probably say, hey, you have to view this as a business now. You can't view it as a quick side hustle anymore like you used to be able to. And the book's a little bit outdated, so I don't recommend people go buy it right now. But ultimately, that I was, part of that messaging early on because you used to be able to, right? You used to be able to go to Walmart, buy a bunch of clearance stuff, or even find some replenishable type items and be able to make a pretty quick buck on certain things. But now it's changed. And so I think that's part of it.
Yeah, that unfortunately transcends not just the Amazon business. I listened to us talk about this. I'm even thinking about, social media effects on my kids. It's not just Amazon. You need to reinforce that you're only seeing the highlight reel, the greatest hits. You're not seeing the negative. So it's interesting how it transcends other parts of our lives.
Yeah. And I would say too, people just want an easy button, and it's not just e-commerce. It's now AI, and it's, how can you make a quick buck by setting up OpenClaw to run a whole business for you without you ever intervening? Like, that's not real. It may be for one or two people, but it's not real for the majority of people. But it's just the messaging that works and gets people's attention. So yeah, anyway, I'll let you continue, but I just wanted to add that in. It's not just e-commerce. It's all the side hustles online effectively.
Yeah. How many billions does the dieting industry make on that same messaging? Right. Yeah. Jimmy, I want to double down on this because I think it's such an important observation that you made. Chris asked you about it, to use an economic term, they call it like a K-shaped economy where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's kind of how I summarize the current state of Amazon. But you basically have this dichotomy where the newer sellers, maybe, lower volume, they're saying this is the hardest it's ever been. And then, like you mentioned, experienced sellers are saying that this is actually getting pretty easier, if I'm being honest, right? But I want to take it from the operation standpoint to kind of like the mentality, the way we talk about this, if we could. What's the difference from a mental aspect of the two groups of people?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So from the mental aspect, I would say the successful sellers typically have a mindset of they can overcome any of the challenges. They've gone through challenges before with Amazon. So as Amazon continues to throw curveballs, so to speak, they can overcome those. Additionally, they probably have a mindset of, okay, if I have an issue, I also have a network or connections that I can speak with, because most large sellers are connected in some way in some group of people. Again, whether it's free or paid, or they just have a small group that they've connected with online and they just continue to work with. And so they kind of have confidence in the group that they're working with and confidence in themselves. Where the newer sellers, it may just be a situation of the network that they're surrounded with is very negative. And so they look at Amazon as an enemy, and that's a difficult place to be. It's hard to succeed in anything if you look at your, let's just call it employer or the company that you're serving as an enemy of yours, right? You wouldn't want somebody in the military that hated the United States, right? You wouldn't want somebody selling on Amazon that really hates Amazon and the things that they're doing. And it's going to be the same. You wouldn't want a franchise owner for McDonald's that hates McDonald's as a franchisor. All of these, things come back to that mindset. And so I think that's the important aspect behind it, is you have to have positive outlooks. And most successful sellers that I talk to, even if they're real and they know that there's extra struggles, they're still positive about being able to succeed online with whatever Amazon throws their way. And some of them also have some pretty good backup plans too. Maybe they've built it and scaled it enough to where they've started to build some other side income streams, whether that's through, courses or coaching, or that's through, doing Amazon influencer, or that's selling on Walmart and eBay and whatnot, and all of these other platforms, so they've kind of gone through that process and they know that the business model works, and they're pretty positive about being able to overcome any of those issues. That's kind of how I would view it. Just the abundance mentality versus, that everybody's out to get you mentality.
And for the intermediate seller, I think there's often a gap in the advice for the people in the middle. There's a bit of maybe, sunk cost fallacy is a positive in this sense. They've been doing it for X number of years now, and they're kind of spinning their wheels a little bit. What actionable advice would you give the intermediate seller to start reframing this from a side hustle to a real business?
Well, I think if I'm looking at that standpoint for those intermediate sellers, a lot of times where they get stuck is there's two different reasons I would say that many of them get stuck. One is because it may just be some sort of subconscious type of a pattern that they don't believe that they can succeed further than what they've already done. And so they're worried about the expansion, and they're worried that they won't be able to actually hit those numbers that other people are hitting, even though they've already hit a certain cap. Now, I know for some people that's probably like, that's a little woo or whatever, right? But ultimately it is real, right? We have certain limiting beliefs about ourselves. And, for some of those intermediate sellers, that's going to be one of the reasons. Now, another reason could be very real things, right? They have, 3, 4, 5 kids, or even one kid. They want to be able to grow this business, but they don't have the time to grow it because, they've got a job and they're only able to work 10 hours a week, and they want to make sure that they're providing for their kids. And so they don't want to essentially roll the dice on Amazon only. And so they're stuck in their ways. And so from my vantage point, if you want to grow and you're in that space and you know that, hey, I can grow this if I just had more time or if I had more help, that's when you need to start looking for more help. And what I did back in 2019 is I had to take a look in the mirror and say, ultimately this business isn't going to grow unless I get more help. And so that is what I decided to do, reduce the profits that I was taking so that way I could reinvest into employees and team members and building systems. And I think for intermediate sellers, that's what they need to do as well. From time to time, if you don't have the extra time to put into the business, then you're going to have to find some way to get back that time or to outsource that time to somebody else. And you may have to take a small profit hit for a little while you're training, while you're setting up those systems and getting people installed. But once you do that, you are going to see your business grow as long as it's done the right way. Now, the other thing a lot of people have issues with is they look at profit margin. And so maybe they're making 15 to 20% profit margin by themselves, and they don't want their profit margins to dwindle down to 8 to 12% by getting some extra help into their business. And in that case, I understand it. But if you can grow your business, and in my case, it was going from $30,000 to $100,000 in just about 6 months. Now that may or may not be the case for other people, but that massive increase, let's just call it a 3x increase for a little bit more expenses, was really worth it. So the profit margins back then were about 25% for us. It went down to 15%, but we had done 3 times the amount of sales. And so overall, our profit was much better. But I think it's just that mindset of you need to continually reinvest into your business. If it's not growing, it's dying. And it's a dangerous game to play. And so if you really believe in it, you're seeing it work, you've seen other sellers ahead of you make this work by outsourcing certain activities, then you should probably start looking at that too. So that's what I would tell the intermediate seller. I also thought of something else from the standpoint of why is it easier now than it used to be for experienced and even for new sellers. The amount of software that exists that didn't before is like, it's crazy how good this stuff is. And even if, you look at some lead sourcing tools, some of those sourcing softwares as sometimes they're junk leads. Even if you look at it from that standpoint, it's still better than starting from nothing. And I used to preach about how I would stand in one aisle in Walmart for 4 hours to look at every individual product. I don't need to do that anymore, right? Software tools exist. Keepa has gotten so much better with their data and their pro product finder. And there are other tools that can now monitor those leads for you, whether it's, Chris, yours, asin.so, or it's 3P Mercury or sourceflow.io. These tools exist to help you stay on top of those leads. So that has also made this a lot easier for both new and existing sellers, in my opinion. But ultimately it's something that, it still takes extra work. It's not just an easy button. You still have to double down and rabbit trail and find some good suppliers and some good ASINs, but it still makes it easier to get going and to scale from that standpoint.
It's difficult for the newer seller to find a source of truth. And so I want us to talk to them for a moment. If you were going to sit down, I know we can't give them the entire playbook in a podcast, but if we were going to sit down with a newer Amazon seller, what would you tell them is the playbook to get started, like from zero today?
That's a great question. Yeah. So whenever I look at it, I would say there's a couple very important things to do. First, fully dive into Keepa. That is so important. That's why you teach it. It's why I teach it. Ultimately, having keys or systems around how to use Keepa and the product finder and how to read those Keepa charts, that's going to set you apart from every other seller that doesn't have a full understanding. So that is, to me, step one. If you can figure out Keepa, you have a very good likelihood of succeeding long-term because you know how to read the charts, you know how to find other things that are within that brand or within that category, and you can pull out the best of the best leads using Keepa. Now, second, I think that there's a twofold part to this second answer. For me, sourcing used to be like fishing with a fishing pole, right? So you would go out, you try to find one fish, and if you did, great. If you didn't, then you move on, you do it the next day and hope that you find something. Now it's much more kind of fishing with a net. And so you can either with Keepa pull back a lot of ASINs, or with a sourcing tool, you can utilize some of their tools to take those ASINs and find suppliers for you. But you're trying to fish with that net. So that way you can pull back as many products as possible, get rid of the ones that are really no good, which is going to happen. But then you have, 1 to 5% probably that are going to be great right now. And then they're going to continue to get better throughout the year if you save those leads. So for me, I would say just focus on fishing with that net as much as possible. Use Keepa, do either a master search in Nepedo or a reverse search in Tactical Arbitrage or in Arbisource or any of the other sourcing tools, and you're going to find suppliers that are matched. After that point, it's going to be rabbit trailing, looking at competitors, looking at brands you're ungated in, looking in those suppliers, and then continuing to use discounts, coupon codes, etc., to increase that profit margin for you to separate yourself from others. So I don't know if that's clear for people. Obviously, if I had more than just a few minutes to answer it, I would be able to sit down and show the exact process of what I would recommend. But to me, that is the basic playbook for new sellers to get started, because you need to understand Keepa. You need to find as many products as you can and see what you're ungated in. And then you need to double down on what you're ungated in to actually be able to sell products.
Yeah. I want to get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty, the operation. You've been refreshingly honest when you said you didn't build $10 million in online sales from a secret strategy. You built it because you built systems primarily. Now you train sellers on over 100 different SOP that covers sourcing, prep, shipping, account management, cash flow. So for the seller doing, let's say $10,000 to $20,000 a month, who knows they need systems, but they don't know where to start, what's the very first SOP that they should build?
Yeah. So the first SOP that I would recommend, it always comes back to revenue generation. That's going to be first, right? You need to make as much money as possible. So whether that's sourcing systems or it's a certain Keepa, product finder outline that you'd like to use, those types of systems should come first. Now, after the kind of the revenue generation side of it, you should probably look at things that are going to take some work off your plate. And so maybe it's getting a virtual assistant to handle account management. It's handling those reimbursements in some of those cases. Those surprisingly just take so much of a mental load off of you. Plus there's a lot of time invested at, an intermediate level. When you're handling all of that, you can get somebody to handle that for you for, $4 to $6 an hour. Those would be the things that I would say first and foremost. Now, actually, for me, the way that I did it was I outsourced prep first. Now, the reason that I did that was because that was kind of a revenue generating thing for me, because I loved sourcing. And so instead of me trying to find somebody to source for me, I wanted to outsource the prep. So that way my time was freed up for me to do all the sourcing. So it comes down to what you're comfortable with. If somebody is using a prep center, then they don't have that issue. They've already outsourced it. They should start to outsource their sourcing first. Or if somebody loves the prep side of it, then maybe they should outsource the sourcing first. But for me, it was actually outsourcing prep and ship. And then I had the freedom to be able to do all of the sourcing that I wanted to, and then eventually outsource that as as well.
I got to jump in for just a second. How many psychopaths do you know that love the prep side first?
Honestly, there's a few of them, obviously, but they usually end up starting prep centers. If I'm fully transparent, they realize, oh wait, there's actually a business that I enjoy, so I'm going to start a prep center instead. But I can't count how many there are. You'd be surprised though.
We're in the book club. We're reading "Buy Back Your Time" by Dan Martell. So this is all very familiar. It's making me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. You said that being hands-on isn't leadership. That's actually being a bottleneck. What was the moment that you realized that in your business?
Yeah, so going back to 2018, whenever I quit my job, I tried to do everything, right? So I quit my job with I guess I was making about 50% of what I was making at my job. I was making that on my Amazon business. And I assumed, hey, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to double or triple the amount of time I'm working on the Amazon business. So my business should grow because of it. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Nothing grew. And the reason was because of me. I tried to do so many different things at once that nothing was working. So I tried to do more private label or more wholesale. I tried to do local businesses and local merch. I don't know if y'all had ever gone through that or much about that, but I tried to do all of these different things, even the PPP model, the product partnering model with brands. And I was the bottleneck at that point, right? Nothing's going to grow if you aren't sending in more product and you're not buying more inventory. And so I needed to build systems. And so that was kind of the point for me that, all right, if I don't want to have to go back to selling insurance, then I need other people to help me get the prep and ship stuff done, because I hated it so much. I would avoid it at all costs for trying to do anything else that would get me out of it. And so that's what the point was. So at the time, I actually got a warehouse. We didn't even do it out of the house. We got a warehouse. It was a small one, hired a couple of employees, and that's what took the business from 30,000. It was June of 2018 to 70,000 in August of 2018. So it scaled very fast because the amount of product that was able to be purchased was double effectively, because I no longer had to do the prep and ship. And I was able to get some stuff that was harder to prep and ship because I didn't want to do it before, but now I can have somebody else do it. And so, yeah, that was the point for me.
I don't like this term, but I'm going to use it because it is the parlance that everyone else uses. It's VAs. I prefer offshore talent or offshore team members, but you built VA teams for your own sourcing, for purchasing, for logistics across your business, and you've helped other people do it. But a lot of people, I think, treat hiring their first VA as maybe a Band-Aid. I don't really know how to source so well, so I'm going to hire someone to do that. And I'm just curious, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make when they hire their first VAs or maybe their first couple of VAs?
Yeah, so there are a few mistakes that I would say for people that are hiring VAs early on, especially. One is, like you mentioned, it's a Band-Aid. Maybe they're not very good at sourcing. And so they think, hey, if I get a virtual assistant, they're going to be better than me at sourcing, which never happens, right? Your virtual assistant rises almost to the level of where you're at early on in your sourcing. Now, eventually they can become better than you if they're focused 100% on it. But at first, they are reliant on you to ensure that they understand how to source and how to source the way you want them to. So that is the first mistake, is people think that it's going to be an easy button, that, oh, cool, it's just $5 an hour. I'm going to outsource that to somebody else, and I'm going to be able to make a bunch more money than that. But the reality is, we all know sourcing is difficult. And if it's difficult for you, who's in the United States, who understands a lot of the retailers and the markets, and you understand Keepa already, and you try to outsource that to somebody else who actually doesn't have any of that backdrops, typically, it's going to be a very tough road for them and for you. Now, you can train them up, but you have to be the one to learn those things first. And so that's a big mistake that I see for people getting their first virtual assistants. Now, I've placed hundreds at this point, because it's something that I've done just on a small scale for sellers in the communities and stuff that want my help with that. And what the other mistake that I see is that they also don't realize that it's still a real expense. They look at it and they say, oh, cool, it's just $5 an hour, but it still adds up. I mean, it's $200 a week, $800 a month. Plus, you have a 13th month pay at the end of the year, which is basically a full extra month of pay for your virtual assistant if they're in the Philippines anyway. And so they may make mistakes sometimes on what the actual cash requirements are. And they realize a month and a half later that, oh, wow, I've spent $1,000 that I didn't really have. And I thought that this would be a much faster process for somebody to be able to come in and basically source for me, but it just has been a bigger time drain and also money drain than I expected. The people that do well with it look at their current profits. They can see that they have the money for it. They can see that they also have the time to train their virtual assistant into their business. And then they're able to devote basically a month of additional time. It's not a full month of time, but maybe it's an extra hour or two per day of training your virtual assistant, or longer early on. And they make an actual plan. Just like if you were hiring somebody in any other business, they typically know, all right, if I hire this person, they should have this kind of return for me in, a month or two, and it's going to be this extra cost, and I'm going to have to spend this much time in training them. You have to look at it from that standpoint. It's not just, oh, cool, I'm just going to pay somebody $5 an hour and they're going to handle this for me. It is a real expense, and it takes real time to make sure that they are fully trained into your business to do a good job.
Mm-hmm. Is there a revenue level? Is there some easy button, as much as we don't like them here? Is there some easy way to figure out when it's time to bring in help?
So easy way, I would say, as soon as you can afford it and you know that you're mentally prepared for it, because it's going to take time and your own mental bandwidth. But as soon as you can afford it, you should, if you want to grow your business beyond a certain level. A lot of people, that starts around 10 to 30,000 per month, somewhere in that range. It could be because they have not enough time to be able to do everything they want to, but they do have some money to invest into it. That would be that for some people could be at 10, 12,000 a month. And for other people, that could be 25 or 30,000 a month. But as soon as you can afford it, I would say you start outsourcing if that's what you want to do, is grow your business. If you're happy with where you're at, then cool. You don't need to outsource. There's nobody out here is telling people that, hey, you have to hit $100,000 a month to be considered a serious seller. It comes back to, what do you want your business to do for you in your life? And so for some people, that's going to be, hey, I want to scale it. And if you want to scale it, then as soon as you can afford it is when you should start.
So pattern recognition is something that we talk about with new sellers. That's basically the importance of getting the reps in and learning to source when they're first starting out. Now, you have the perspective of having a bunch of students. You interact with a lot of people in the community. So I'm wondering if your skills in pattern recognition have identified patterns in sellers, specifically comparing ones who break through versus the ones who stay stuck. Is there anything you can share as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on a lot of it already, actually. So first is going to be the mentality that they understand this is a long-term play. One thing that we have inside of the Legends community is a 90-day roadmap. And that's what you should do each day for 90 days to actually start succeeding. The people that have gone through and they post every day, hey, here's what I did today following that system, they typically are the ones that are going to at least see some success early on. And so having that mindset is important of, I have to do something each day that's going to move my business or my life forward. And if you do that, you're going to be much further ahead than other people. Another thing would be just asking questions. I see a lot of successful sellers that do well because they asked questions early on. And they were able to just kind of, leave their pride at the door, so to speak. Sometimes we're too scared to ask questions because we don't want to look stupid or something. But there, in the Amazon business, there's so many crazy things. Like, it's not a stupid question. Just, ask it and we'll be able to help you. And so somebody that's willing to ask questions, be surrounded by the community, and do the work is kind of the first pattern. Next is going to be that long-term outlook. And so, having that viewpoint of 6 months to a year of being able to do the right activities each day. If you can view the business model from that standpoint, you're going to see success. And ultimately, it does come down to just knowing that I'm going to do something that's moving my business forward. I'm going to source every day. I'm going to send shipments in at least once per week. I'm going to create these routines that are more based around my activity level, the things that I'm doing, and less caring about the results that Amazon's going to show. Now, you naturally need to look at those results, but if you're basing your business around, I have to hit 10K per month by month 3, but you didn't source enough and you didn't buy enough inventory, well, it's not Amazon's fault. It's not that the business model didn't work. It's just that you didn't put in the exact work that was going to lead you there. So those are probably the 3 things, is just, showing up each day, doing the right stuff each day, making sure that you are surrounded by community and asking questions, and then knowing that you are actually doing things that are pushing your business forward and what that looks like. And it's almost always the business is simple, right? We have two things we have to focus on the majority of the time, and that's sourcing and sending products into Amazon. Everything else can be a distraction. Everything else, yes, we have to deal with. But if you're not sourcing and sending inventory in, your business will never grow. And that's just how it works. And so those are the two things every new seller should focus on.
All right. Let's switch gears just a little bit. I was at two different conferences on the same weekend. I was at your conference. I also went to the unconference. And of course, almost the entirety of my conversations were AI. How are you using AI? What are you doing with it? And of course, it's everywhere right now. And I think I've heard you make a pretty important distinction. Like, there are sellers who are using it in practical, everyday ways, not necessarily some futuristic, everything's automated, here comes paradise kind of things. I think I heard you mention like SOPs, email templates, wholesale outreach, data analysis. And I also know that there are some, for lack of a better term, normies out there who haven't even touched AI yet. And maybe they are feeling overwhelmed by it. For the seller who wants to start implementing or at least learning about AI, what's the very first best use case that you've seen so far?
Well, for somebody that's brand new into AI, they should just start with learning how to prompt the typical AI platform. So that could be ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, even any of those typical LLMs or language learning models. Those are the places that they should start with. And by prompting, I mean, what are you asking AI to do and how do you ask it the right way? That to me is the very first underpinning of how to even start to use it, because AI can do a lot of things, but if you don't ask it to do things in the right way, it's not going to do it the way that you want it to. Now, from an AI perspective, I think the reason that it keeps coming up over and over again, and I'm spending a lot more of my time into it now, is because in the last 3 to 6 months, it's gotten exponentially better. So I started right when ChatGPT came out, at least into the public, atmosphere. I started playing with ChatGPT since 2022, I think is whenever it kind of exploded onto the scene. And in the last 3 to 6 months, the things that have changed, I'm looking at these and it's now changing the world in a much bigger way than it's kind of what we expected to happen in 2022, but it wasn't there yet. Now it's here and now it's practical. And now there's a lot of content, a lot of great creators out there showing you how to do more things with AI that normal people can understand. It used to be kind of behind the wall, so to speak, of, well, if you know how to code, then you can probably use AI for some coding stuff, but it's really at a higher level. But now with Claude Cowork, with some of the open Claude, which is still a little bit technical, these things are much more real for people that take the time to learn them. And it's only going to get easier. But if you're brand new, just start getting into ChatGPT. Don't use it for like a Google search. I mean, you can, but a lot of people right now are just basically using it to say, hey, how do I create this recipe or something like that? What's much better is saying, hey, I want you to act as this type of a thing. So act as an entrepreneur or act as a business advisor and take a look at these financial spreadsheets that I'm going to upload and tell me where some expenses are that maybe I should look at cutting, or ask me hard questions about some of these expenses I have to make sure that I actually really need them. And recently, I'm saving now $10,000 a year because of one new AI tool that's $50 a month that I no longer have to pay somebody to do for me. And it's for video editing and other things. I was paying for an editor for all of my videos for years, and now I don't need to. It's crazy the amount of progress that has been made in the last 3 to 6 months, and I absolutely love it. I'm here for it. It's going to change the game for people, and it's a rabbit hole that once you start to look into, you'll probably never get out of. And we have to remember that even though it's in every conversation right now, essentially in our space, we're still probably part of just the 5% that are really looking at it and learning about it. There's 95% of the rest of the population that knows about it, but ignores it or doesn't look into it. And so there's a lot of opportunity here for your own business. There's a lot of opportunity to help other businesses, but it's a hard road. I mean, it's a lot of hard work. And so, you can get into it, but once you start using things and seeing how real it is, it's crazy. Now, some of the other ways too is for product images. Nano Banana just came out with another model, and that has been huge. It's creating great lifestyle images and stuff. So from an e-commerce perspective, that's an easy one. If you're somebody that wants to grow your brand presence and do brand partnerships, AI has gotten a lot better at writing things for LinkedIn and posting things to different platforms for you. There's so much that has come out. It's almost too much, even for me to digest, but it is continually getting better. And just seeing what OpenClaw and Claude Cowork has done recently, it is undeniable now. So that's where actually a lot of my attention goes, is trying to figure out how to use that in more practical ways. Because, you get on X, you get it even on YouTube, and you'll see somebody say, hey, I got a Mac Mini and I opened up OpenClaw and I gave it a credit card and a Stripe account and I told it to build me a business to $100,000 per month. And, and I've seen one or two people that say that has happened. I don't know if that's actually the case, but that's not really real. And so what is real is, how can I save 5 hours a month or a week by using AI in one specific way? How can I use it for lead management? How can I use it for going through reports? And even what I recommend for Amazon sellers, reimbursements, right? You can update all of your reimbursement costs, your sourcing costs for Amazon. Just give a ChatGPT that spreadsheet and say, hey, update this by 10%. So that way you can get a little bit more and you can submit those to Amazon. Like little things like that, where you don't have to create the formulas anymore. You don't have to go through and do all of it. You can just have AI do that for you. You can create a recurring task. It's crazy what can be done now. And so that's why, I don't know if I fully answered the question, but that's why I think it's such an important topic. And that's where I would recommend new sellers start, is those LLMs, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, and learning how to just ask it to do things and ask it good questions.
Yeah. Some of the stuff you can do is amazing and fun also. I think humans like to be at the edge of their capabilities, at least some of them, and using AI can help us kind of get there. I know, during the OA challenge, we took a day to talk about AI, and we were able to build, we've built a clearance calendar, and we built a profit and loss dashboard and sourcing dashboard, and all these kind of things that I failed out of Excel in college. I had to cheat my way to get a failing grade in Excel in college. And now I can just say, listen, magic computer box, spit out this for me, and it does it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about a real use case here. So you've talked about, using AI to dump raw data from Seller Central and then start asking it questions or, telling it to give you some advice. Can you walk us through maybe a very simple, like, what report should I pull first and what kind of question should I ask it?
Yeah. So there's a couple different things that I would recommend. I kind of already mentioned the one. So one would be the sourcing costs. That's an easy one. If you're somebody that's not staying up to date with your sourcing costs, you can easily pull that report and send it to Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, I want you to update these sourcing costs that Amazon has for me, which is typically way too low from what you actually paid for it. And just update this by an extra 8% or 10%. And then you re-upload that to Amazon. And many times they'll auto accept a lot of them. They may ask for documentation on others, but just doing that once per month can be a huge time saver. You could set up formulas as well, but AI can do a lot of that for you. Now, another one would be restock reports. So you could easily get your restock report from Amazon and upload it to one of those LLMs, and then it can tell you, hey, based on this data, these are the things you should look at restocking, because Amazon gives you a lot of visibility for how often things sell now. When they didn't 6 years ago, now they do. And so you can upload that to one of them and it will tell you, hey, these are the top 10 things to restock today. And so that is very helpful. Now, it's even more helpful if you can combine it with other tools as well that you probably have access to. Maybe you can take an ASIN list that you have from your inventory, upload that into the Keepa product viewer, get that downloaded and say, based on the last 30 days bought in the past month amount or the sales ranks, what are the items that I should look at restocking or that I should look at, purchasing again? And for me, that's been a huge help. And then also your profit and loss, like I mentioned this earlier a little bit, you can easily upload that to ChatGPT and say, hey, what of these expenses should I look at more? What stands out? What are the things, ask me some questions about these expenses and I'll answer them and let me know if I should keep paying for this. I can't tell you how many sellers pay for software that they aren't using. And that's an easy way to kind of realize it, is just by having AI kind of audit some of that stuff for you. So there's so many different ways that you can use it, but those are some of the easiest and simplest ones right now.
And what do you say to the person who says, but my privacy? How do you combat that?
Yeah. So if you are a bookkeeping firm or a CPA firm, I wouldn't do some of that. But from the standpoint of privacy for your numbers and your profit and loss, you could black out some information. You could just put it into a spreadsheet and say, hey, based on these expenses, tell me what are the things that I should be looking at. You can remove or redact some of that information fairly easily. I am of the opinion I have probably no privacy anyway from everything that's out. So I'm not too concerned. However, if I had client sensitive data and I was running a business that had sensitive information, I would not be using it in that way. I would try to think of some other creative ways to probably use it at that point.
So we can't put a button on AI without some prognostication. You've talked to a friend of the show, Dylan Carter, founder of Aura, recently, and he said for the first time in a while, he's gotten the itch to sell again based on what can be done with AI combined with the less competition that we talked about earlier. Seemed like you agreed with him. Do you think that AI is going to be the thing that separates sellers who scale versus the ones that end up plateauing?
I do agree with Dylan that now is such a great time to get into reselling. It's interesting to hear him say that. And I'm glad that he feels that way because, I think we all kind of do. But from the standpoint of will this separate the sellers who scale from those who plateau? I think this could be a factor in certain sellers scaling faster and more profitably. I don't necessarily fully believe that it's going to separate those who succeed from those who fail or anything, because you can still build systems around it. You can still do virtual assistants and you can just continue to grow as we always have. I mean, business is business. The thing that AI is going to do is it will accelerate the rate at which sellers can scale and some of the profitability behind it as well, based on all the different metrics they may be using. So if somebody fully embraces AI, you may be able to spot certain price discrepancies for arbitrage that other sellers won't, or you may be able to find a supplier that other sellers aren't able to find because they just didn't take the time to look. But for those that are trying to grow and scale their business, it's not a requirement. It just contractor, it's not a requirement for them to put in AI to their business. But if they were for lead generation and for emails, follow-up, they're going to move further ahead than some of the other contractors. So I think you can still scale without it. It's just a little bit of a harder road than for those that are going to fully embrace it and add it into all of their businesses. But I will say too, AI falls kind of like a virtual assistant falls to the level at which you understand a process many times. Like they're not going to be able to exceed you for a long time until they have a lot of experience. AI falls to the level of how good your systems are. And so if you don't have systems behind any of your business, AI is not going to really, it can help, but it's going to be much better if you have good systems behind it. If you know how you want to handle some of your reimbursements or your restocking and you tell it exactly, here's how I'm doing it. Let me know if there's any better way to do it, but I want you to handle this for me. That's going to be a much better use case for people than those that are just out here saying, hey, ChatGPT, go and source profitable products for me. Like that's not how it's currently working. It could in the future, but AI will fall to the level of your systems and how good your business actually runs. So you need to get that first. And then after that, the AI will be able to follow those processes, almost like a virtual assistant does, right? Or a team member. And so, that's kind of my viewpoint on it.
So let's really make the doomers uncomfortable. Dylan made a prediction a couple of years ago that sellers would have AI agents doing the sourcing. And 2 years ago, he said it was 2 to 3 years away. So we're actually entering that period of time. Mm-hmm. Doesn't sound like you.
I think that period is coming. But it is not something that's currently here as far as I've been able to trial out. It's not currently here yet. Now, I am investing much more time into agent building and things. I know ClickUp is what I use for a lot of systems, and ClickUp has ClickUp agents, and you can do a lot with that. And so I do think that there may be a nice middle ground to that prediction of giving an AI agent a list of ASINs that you want it to go out and find profitable suppliers for. But you can also use a sourcing tool for that. So you could potentially just say, all right, I'm going to use this sourcing tool, and then I'm going to give that list to the AI agent and have it build a purchase order for me or a purchase list that I should just go through and click through and add everything to my cart. I'm still at the stage of I wouldn't give it a credit card, but I think that you could have it do a lot of stuff for you. I think in the next 6 months to 2 years, somewhere in there, we will have AI agents that can do sourcing for us, which will change the game in a lot of different ways. But there's still going to be guardrails that need to be put onto those agents. There's still going to be people that need to monitor those things to do it the right way, because AI can hallucinate, right? It can screw up, and you have to be sure that you're not giving a credit card to a computer to then pay $10,000 for something you're never going to recoup. So that's kind of how I view it. I do think AI agents can do a lot more right now within the wholesale space. If you have a supplier and UPC codes, they can do more there than it can on the arbitrage side, just because you have a direct relationship already. So it's a lot easier to keep up with. But ultimately, will continue to get better through time. It's just not there yet.
I'm more and more convinced that we're in the same hype cycle that we talked about with Amazon FBA earlier, where you read on social media that it's 10x. It's not quite that. It's not quite that easy, but there are tangible incremental gains to be had with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that it's much better for sellers to view, how can I save 5 hours a week with AI versus how can I automate the entire business? I don't think that's a wise decision just yet.
Before we move to the next topic, this is perhaps the most important AI question. Are you saying please and thank you so that when Skynet does launch, that you're saved?
No, so that's not something that I've gotten into at all, but yeah, I'm here for the AI side of stuff to add into my business, but no, I have not said please and thank you.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about building a real business and not just app. But we've talked about this quite a bit already, but I've heard you talk about there's a difference between like setting goals and setting standards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've said like most sellers set revenue goals, and maybe you think that's a little bit of the wrong frame. Can you kind of explain that distinction and how it changes the way that someone operates their business?
Yeah, so goals are meaningless unless you back them up with action. And so I could say today that I want to be able to, swim underwater like a fish. That's a great goal, but I can't do it, right? There's no actions that I can actually breathe underwater, right? So goals are basically meaningless. I can say I want to grow my Amazon business from, the point where it's at now to 100x where it's at in the next year. That it means nothing. Goals really do mean nothing unless you have the standards behind them. And so from my vantage point, if you have a goal, you can have a goal to 10x your revenue or 2x your revenue, but you need to set up retroactively to whenever that goal is. You need to set up, what is it that I need to do to get there? So let's say your goal is to hit $100,000 per month. Well, you need to spend $40,000 a month on inventory, typically on average, anywhere from 35 to 50, depending on your margins and the things you're purchasing. Okay. Well, if it's $40,000 per month, what do I need to spend then per week? Well, it's $10,000 per week. And if you're sourcing one day, that'd be $10,000 a day. If you're sourcing 5 days a week, that would be $2,000 per day. But that needs to be your standard, the things that you execute on and that you will continue to focus on each time that you start your work. Because if you just have a goal of hitting $100,000 per month, it means nothing unless you're actually doing the right work to get you there. And we know in Amazon, the great thing about the Amazon business is we can take a look at somebody's sales right now. And I can say, well, what did you spend 2 to 3 months ago? Because that's probably around where you're going to be at for your revenue goals now, or what you're actually selling. So that's what I mean by it, is like a goal is great. I think you should set goals, but in the context of your goal, you need to set up the standards that you're going to complete each day. And you will need one for each facet of the business. You'll need it for sourcing. You'll need to make sure you're getting enough shipments out, and you'll need to make sure that you're staying on top of any of the account issues that come up. And so for most people, the leading goal is going to be the sourcing part. The lagging goal, the thing that is actually coming after all of the work, is going to be the sales down the road. So that's what I mean by that.
So you recommend what I think is one of the more underrated acronyms, KPI reviews on a weekly basis. For the seller who's currently just logging into Seller Central and hoping that there's a whole bunch of orange bars, what are the 3 numbers, in your opinion, that they should start tracking this week that will change their entire process?
Yeah, so there's a few. So the 3 that I would say first, like I just kind of mentioned, I would be tracking how much you're spending on inventory each week. And if at all possible, each month, add 5 to 10% more to that number if you're trying to grow. Because if you're always spending the same amount per month on inventory, you're going to always be at the same level. So that is the very first one. I would say for the second one, you could, depending on your setup, you could look at how much you're getting out per hour in inventory. I think because I've run a warehouse, there are prep and ship KPIs that you need to adhere to within your business. And for everybody, that could be different. In some cases, that could be 30 units per person per hour. In other cases, it could be 50. In some, it could be 20. But trying to get better at how many units you get out per hour with your team, that's an important one. And then third KPI would be, I would say, looking at the amount of time that you're actually spending on sourcing. Now, I know that might sound a little weird, but if you're a new seller and you're only spending an hour a day, you will make progress. But maybe can you add an extra 15 minutes a day to that? That's a very basic one for new sellers. So those would probably be the three. You know, how much can you spend each week? What are your shipping KPIs that you're sending out? And then looking at how much time you're actually spending on the business. And even a kind of an inverse of that, how much time are you wasting each day? And, you know, it's a surprising activity that whenever I encourage people to take a week and actually document how they're spending their time, they realize how much time is wasted. That doesn't mean that you're sitting on the couch watching shows with your family. That's family time, right? That's a good use of your time in some cases. But it could be that you spend an hour every day scrolling on Facebook on things that are worthless and not adding value to your life. If you're in Facebook or in a community because you're learning, that's different. So those kind of things, I think auditing your time, your ability to get units out, and your ability to source, those are probably my three kind of overarching KPIs for most people.
Perfect. We always like to have a little bit of a lightning round. So you're great at networking, and you know, we've talked about how people have helped you in your business, and so you've got all these contacts. Who is in your phone that every Amazon seller should have their own version of for like a role or a specialist?
Well, right now, I think there's two. First would be somebody that is really focused on AI and different ways that you can use that. And I think just having somebody that you can lean on and ask about certain questions of, hey, is this something that I could automate with AI? I think that would be a huge help for many sellers, especially if you don't know much about it. Second would be specialists in handling the brand management on Amazon. I come across in the wholesale side of the business, you know, companies that really don't want to do wholesale, but they wish that they had a better handle on Amazon. And I could build that business, but I just don't have the time. And so for me, it's nice to have a contact that I can reach out to and say, hey, here's somebody that can help. And in some cases, they'll give an affiliate commission if they sign that person or that company and they work with them. And so for me, those are kind of the two big ones, is AI, because that's changing and you need somebody to kind of help you along the way. And then second, kind of the brand management side. If you're involved in any conversations with brands at all, that's a very important thing to have in your Rolodex, so to speak.
What would you say is the most underrated skill that an Amazon seller could have, the one that most people don't talk about?
I would say from an underrated skill, probably the importance of rabbit trailing. And, you know, I know that you talk about it a lot on this channel, so it's probably the wrong audience for this answer, but rabbit trailing is underrated because of all the sourcing tools. And so, you know, I come across new sellers all the time. I show them how to use the sourcing tools that exist, but they say, oh, this sourcing tool is no good because the leads tank or they don't match perfectly. But it's not about the sourcing tool. It's about how do you take those leads that they're already giving you and turn them into 10 more that are outside of that tool. And so being able to rabbit trail and actually take a lead and manually source, I think that's another area actually where experienced sellers crush it in comparison to new sellers, is because the experienced sellers had to go through all of the iterations of we only can manually source. And so we learned how to do that, and newer sellers aren't learning that as much. And so just being able to do that is definitely an underrated skill.
What is a purchase that you've made under $500 in the past 6 months to a year that has had the most impact either for your business or your life?
I can probably give you two. So they're both software tools. So one is that software tool. It saved me 10 grand a year on video editing. So that's $50 a month, real cheap. And I'm able to save a lot of money. The second one is actually a software tool most specifically for Amazon Influencer Program, which I've been playing around with for a few months at this point. And that has helped me go from $80 a month to now $1,800 a month because of the tool that I've just been able to use and then outsource that to my virtual assistant. So those two have made huge leaps. I mean, essentially, if I look at it, it's probably $150 a month in total costs between those two tools. And I'm making now $30,000 extra because of them. So for me, that's been huge.
You want to name drop those tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the video editing one is Gling AI, Gling AI. That's been huge. And then the Amazon Influencer one, I actually use Viral View. I know a lot of people use Oink. I haven't played around with that yet, but Viral View has been huge because I've been able to outsource all of the brand messaging to a virtual assistant. I spend a few dollars, per hour on that. And all that I have to do is basically spend under an hour a day total doing videos. And so I usually do them on Saturdays, and I'll spend like 3 hours or so, 3 to 4 hours, and finish out all the videos. And yeah, it's been a good process because that tool kind of automates it for me.
Nice.
Staying in the last 6-month time frame, what's a book or a podcast or even a video that you're recommending to the people you know the most?
It's a great question. So from the standpoint of a book, there are a lot of, I actually have a bookshelf back here. I'm trying to think. For me, you mentioned the Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. That's a great book. The first time I ever built systems was based around a video I found from him back in 2018. Like he was very small online. And so he was instrumental in that for me, but Buy Back Your Time is a great book. Additionally, I appreciate the mindset around an old book, kind of old now at this point, The 4-Hour Work Week. That is not my life, but I like the framework behind it of trying to outsource things. So for me, those would be the books. And then from a video standpoint, any pretty much AI creator that's showing you how to actually automate things, there's a lot of great ones out there, as long as they're not just like, hey, get all the information in my course. You're not going to get anything for free. Like I would avoid them, but there's a lot of people that have courses that are great, but they also show you a lot of great free stuff that you can start to use online.
Where can people go to find you, follow you, connect with you across the internet?
Yeah, so my handle pretty much everywhere is at Ask Jimmy Smith, and my website is askjimmysmith.com. And so, with a name like Jimmy Smith, you have to find some creative way to get a domain and everything. So that is where you can find me. It's typed out right down below there.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that's all in the show notes. We always end the show with a quote of the week, and I thought this one was right up your alley. It's from James Clear. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. And it became pretty clear as we were doing research for this podcast episode that it's sort of the whole connective tissue of your worldview, it seems, when it comes to business is systems. And that's kind of how you built your business. So I thought that was a great quote to end the day with. Jimmy, this was great, man. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on. And it's always great getting to talk to you. So yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That's the pod, everybody.